The confession came from the last person your soulmate ever expected to defend you. For so long, this person had been certain they understood your intentions, your heart, and the reason everything fell apart. But now they have admitted something that changed the entire atmosphere around your soulmate. I was wrong about them. Listen carefully, because what happened after those words were spoken became far more emotional than anyone was prepared for. Your soulmate didn't argue. They didn't celebrate. They simply went quiet, because this was the same person whose opinion had once carried enormous weight. For years, this person had judged you from fragments of a story. They heard certain conversations, witnessed painful moments, and formed conclusions without ever knowing what you were carrying silently. Whenever your name came up, they believed distance was better. They believed your soulmate needed to forget you and move forward. But recently, something changed. A truth reached them that they could no longer ignore. They learned about something you had done quietly, something you never used to gain sympathy, attention, or another chance. And suddenly, the version of you they had created in their mind began falling apart. They started remembering old moments differently. Your silence no longer looked like coldness. Your distance no longer looked like rejection. And one decision you made long ago suddenly looked less like abandonment and more like sacrifice. That realization hit them hard. They went to your soulmate carrying a level of guilt that was impossible to hide. At first, your soulmate thought another warning was coming. Another reason to leave the past buried. Another conversation about why you should remain outside their life. Instead, this person looked directly at your soulmate and said, "There's something I need to admit about you and them." Your soulmate froze. The room became painfully quiet. Then came the confession. "I judged them without knowing the whole truth. And I think my judgment influenced you more than I ever admitted." Your soulmate's expression changed immediately. Because deep inside, they had always wondered whether the people closest to them had misunderstood what existed between the two of you. But hearing someone finally admit it was different. Don't skip this, because the next question your soulmate asked changed the entire conversation. They looked at this person and quietly asked, "What did you find out?" There was a long pause. Then the truth began coming out piece by piece. They explained what they had recently discovered about your side of the story. They admitted there were details they had never known, conversations they had interpreted incorrectly, and assumptions they had treated like facts. Your soulmate listened without interrupting. But their eyes were already becoming emotional. Because with every new detail, old memories were returning. Moments when you tried to explain but nobody wanted to hear you. Moments when your soulmate almost reached out but allowed someone else's opinion to stop them. Moments when both of you may have been waiting for the other person to break the silence. Then this person said the sentence that completely broke your soulmate's composure. "If I had known then what I know now, I would never have told you to walk away from them." Your soulmate lowered their head. For several seconds, nobody spoke. This wasn't anger anymore. It was grief for everything that might have happened differently. Your soulmate finally whispered, "Do you understand how much time we lost?" The person couldn't answer immediately. Because now they understood. They had believed they were protecting someone they cared about, but their certainty had helped create a distance that became harder and harder to cross. Then your soulmate asked another question. A question nobody in that room expected. If you were standing here right now, what would you say to them? The answer came through tears. I would say I'm sorry. I would tell them they deserved to be heard before they were judged. That was when your soulmate could no longer hold everything inside. All the feelings they had buried started rising at once. The love. The regret. The unanswered questions. And most painfully, the possibility that the story between you had never ended because love disappeared. It had simply become buried beneath other people's assumptions. Your soulmate stood up and walked toward the window, trying to regain control. But then something happened that changed the direction of the entire night. The person who had confessed reached into their pocket and placed something on the table. Your soulmate turned around. The moment they recognized what it was, their face changed completely. Because this wasn't only an apology anymore. This person had brought proof of something connected to you. Something they had discovered only recently. And before your soulmate could even touch it, the person quietly said, "There's one more thing you need to know. And after you see this, you may want to find you yourself." Your soulmate stared at what had been placed on the table, but for several seconds they couldn't bring themselves to reach for it. Their hands were trembling slightly, because something inside them already knew this wasn't going to be a small revelation. The person sitting across from them looked completely different now. There was no judgment left in their eyes, no certainty, no attempt to defend what they had done. There was only regret. Finally, your soulmate picked it up and asked quietly, "Where did you get this?" The answer made their heart sink. It was kept away for years. I found it accidentally, and when I realized what it meant, I knew I had to bring it to you. Your soulmate opened it slowly. Inside was something connected to a time when everything between the two of you had begun falling apart. There were words there your soulmate had never seen before, words that showed you had tried to explain yourself long before anyone was willing to listen. Suddenly, the silence they had blamed on you didn't look like silence anymore. There had been an attempt. There had been a message. There had been a truth trying to reach them, but somewhere between you and your soulmate, it had never arrived. Your soulmate looked up sharply. "You're telling me this existed all this time?" The person nodded, but they could barely maintain eye contact. That was when the emotion turned into something deeper. Your soulmate wasn't only thinking about what had been lost. They were beginning to understand how differently their entire life might have unfolded if this truth had reached them when it was supposed to. They started reading again, more carefully this time. Every sentence seemed to reopen another memory. You had mentioned details only the two of you could understand. You had spoken about promises that were never meant for anyone else. You had even explained why you stepped away when staying would have created more pain for your soulmate. It wasn't the story they had been told. It wasn't the version the family had believed. And it certainly wasn't the version this person had judged you for. Then your soulmate reached one particular line and stopped. Their breathing changed. They read it again. Then a third time. The person across from them already knew which line had caught their attention. They lowered their eyes and said, "That's the part that made me realize how wrong I was." Your soulmate couldn't speak. Because those words revealed that even during the worst period between you, you had still been protecting something important to them. You could have exposed everything. You could have defended yourself publicly. You could have pointed fingers and told everyone exactly what had happened. But you didn't. You carried the misunderstanding because revealing the full truth at that moment would have hurt someone your soulmate loved. And now your soulmate finally understood the price you had paid for that silence. They let me believe they didn't care. Your soulmate whispered. The person shook their head. No. I think they cared so much that they accepted being misunderstood. That sentence broke something open. Your soulmate covered their face for a moment. Years of frustration suddenly collided with a completely different understanding of the past. They remembered every time they had told themselves to forget you. Every time they had forced themselves not to reach out. Every time someone close to them had said, if they really loved you, they would have fought harder. But now they were seeing another possibility. Maybe you had fought. Maybe nobody had recognized what your fight looked like. Don't skip this, because your soulmate's next reaction surprised even the person who had brought the truth. They suddenly stood and said, I need to know everything. No more fragments. No more family versions. No more assumptions. They wanted dates, conversations, names, and every detail that had been hidden behind those years of distance. The person began explaining what they had recently uncovered, and with every revelation, your soulmate became quieter. Then came another confession. There was a moment when you almost came back. Your soulmate froze. What do you mean, almost? The person hesitated. That hesitation said enough. Your soulmate stepped closer and repeated, what happened? Finally, the truth came out. There had been a moment when you were ready to reopen the door. You had apparently asked about your soulmate. You wanted to know whether there was still something worth saving. But someone close to the situation believed reopening that relationship would cause more pain, so the message that reached you was very different from what your soulmate actually felt. Your soulmate's eyes filled immediately. What was you told? The answer was devastating, that you had been made to believe your soulmate had completely moved on and wanted no contact. Your soulmate stepped backward as though the words had physically struck them. Because at that exact time, they had been wondering why you never came back. Two people had been waiting. Two people had been hurting. And both had been given reasons to believe the other had chosen to let go. For the first time that night, your soulmate became angry. Not wild anger. Something quieter and more painful. Why didn't anyone ask me what I wanted? There was no good answer. The person who once judged you wrong could only say, "We thought we knew what was best." Your soulmate looked directly at them. And now? The person's voice cracked. Now I think we should have trusted your heart. Silence filled the room again. Then your soulmate picked up the proof from the table and held it close. Their expression had changed. The sadness was still there, but underneath it was determination. This wasn't about living in the past anymore. This was about finally discovering whether the past had stolen something that could still be recovered. The person noticed the change immediately and asked, "What are you thinking?" Your soulmate answered without hesitation. "I'm thinking I spent too many years believing everyone except the one person I should have asked, they meant you." Then your soulmate reached for their phone. The person across from them looked stunned. "Are you going to contact them?" Your soulmate stared at the screen for a long moment. Your name was there, carrying years of memories behind a few simple letters. Their finger hovered over it. But just before they could make the decision, the person who had confessed suddenly said, "Wait. Before you contact you, there's something else I have to tell you." Your soulmate slowly lowered the phone. What else could there possibly be? The person swallowed hard and looked toward the proof sitting on the table. Then came the words that changed everything again. "I wasn't the only person who judged you wrong. Someone else knew the truth much earlier. And I just found out they deliberately kept it from you." Your soulmate didn't move. The phone was still in their hand, your name still glowing on the screen, but suddenly the entire room felt different. This was no longer only about someone admitting they had judged you unfairly. Now there was another person involved, someone who apparently knew enough to change everything and still chose silence. Your soulmate slowly placed the phone back on the table and asked, "Who knew?" The person across from them hesitated, and that hesitation immediately made your soulmate nervous. "Tell me the name." When the name was finally spoken, your soulmate's expression completely changed. It was someone they had trusted deeply. Someone who had been around during the most painful period of your separation. Someone who had repeatedly encouraged your soulmate to accept that you were gone for good. Suddenly, memories that had seemed innocent for years began looking very different. Your soulmate shook their head. "That doesn't make sense. They were the one telling me to move forward." The answer came quietly. "Exactly." Your soulmate stared in disbelief. Then the person explained that after discovering the hidden proof, they had started asking questions. At first, they only wanted to understand why nobody had ever shown it to your soulmate. But one question led to another, and eventually they discovered that this second person had known much more than they ever admitted. They knew you had tried to reach out. They knew your feelings hadn't simply disappeared. And most painfully, they knew your soulmate was still emotionally waiting for you. Yet somehow, the truth never traveled in either direction. Your soulmate walked away from the table, trying to process what they were hearing. "So while I was sitting here believing you had forgotten me, someone knew that wasn't true?" The person nodded. That realization brought tears back into your soulmate's eyes, but this time there was frustration mixed with them. Your soulmate remembered nights when they had nearly contacted you. They remembered writing messages and deleting them. They remembered asking people around them whether reaching out would be a mistake. And every time, someone had convinced them that the answer was yes. Now they wondered how many of those decisions had actually belonged to them. Why? Your soulmate finally asked. Why would anyone do that? The person took a long breath before answering. Because the reason wasn't simple hatred. It wasn't that this person wanted to destroy you. They had convinced themselves that separating the two of you would create a more stable future for your soulmate. They believed another path would be easier, less complicated, more acceptable to the people around them. But somewhere along the way, protection had turned into control. And assumptions had started making decisions that should have belonged to you and your soulmate. Your soulmate's voice became quiet. They decided my future without asking me. Nobody could deny it. Then your soulmate asked something unexpected. Did you ever know any of this? The person shook their head. From everything I've discovered, I don't think you knew the full story either. That answer changed the emotion again. Because your soulmate had spent years wondering why you didn't fight harder, while you may have spent those same years believing there was nothing left to fight for. Two completely different realities. One separation. And a truth that arrived far too late. Your soulmate picked up the old proof again and stared at it. This time, they weren't looking at the words. They were looking beyond them, remembering the person you had been before everything became complicated. The small moments. The private conversations, the promises nobody else knew about. The way you could recognize something was wrong before your soulmate ever said a word. Those memories had never truly disappeared. They had simply been buried beneath years of explanations. Then the person who had originally judged you wrong said something your soulmate wasn't prepared to hear. I owe you an apology, but I think I owe you one too. Your soulmate looked up. Why me? Their voice broke slightly. Because every time you questioned whether you should go back, I told you not to. I thought I was protecting you. I didn't realize I was helping keep you away from someone who might have been waiting for the truth just like you were. Your soulmate's eyes filled again. But instead of responding with anger, they asked one simple question. If you could go back, what would you do differently? The answer came immediately. I would tell you to speak directly to you before believing anyone else. That sentence stayed in the room. Because for the first time, the solution seemed painfully obvious. No middle person. No family interpretation. No friend deciding what somebody meant. No assumptions. Just two people finally having the conversation they should have had years ago. Your soulmate looked at the phone again. This time they picked it up without hesitation. But instead of immediately calling, they began typing. The first message was long. Then they deleted it. They tried again. Deleted that too. How could years of misunderstanding fit inside a message? How could someone say, "I just discovered that the story I believed about us may never have been true"? Finally, your soulmate stopped trying to explain everything. They typed only a few words. "I learned something about us tonight. Can we talk?" Their finger hovered above the send button. The person beside them whispered, "Whatever happens, you deserve to hear the truth directly from you." Your soulmate pressed send. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a minute passed. Then another. Your soulmate tried to pretend they weren't watching the screen, but they couldn't look away. And suddenly, the message showed that it had been seen. Your soulmate's breathing stopped for a second. You had seen it. Now there was no hiding behind the past. No wondering whether the message reached you. It had. But there was no reply. Not immediately. Your soulmate sat down again, staring at the screen. 5 minutes felt like an hour. Then the phone finally moved. A response appeared. Your soulmate opened it immediately. And whatever they expected to read, it wasn't this. The message contained only one sentence. "I wondered how long it would take before someone finally told you what really happened." Your soulmate went completely still. They read it again. Then looked at the person sitting beside them. You knew there was more. But before anyone could answer, another message arrived. This one was longer. Your soulmate began reading, and halfway through, tears started falling. Because you weren't angry. You weren't demanding an apology. Instead, you revealed that years ago, before walking away completely, you had made one final attempt to reach your soulmate. An attempt your soulmate had never known existed. And at the bottom of the message was one detail that changed the entire story. You had kept something from that final attempt all these years. Something that could prove exactly when the truth had been interrupted. Your soulmate immediately typed, "Do you still have it?" The reply came almost instantly. "Yes." Then another message appeared. "And if you're finally ready to know everything, they'll show it to you." Your soulmate looked toward the person who had once judged you wrong. There was no hesitation anymore. Because this time, your soulmate wasn't going to let anyone else decide what happened next. But neither of them knew that when that final piece of proof was revealed, it wouldn't only expose who kept you apart. It would reveal why someone had been so afraid of you returning to your soulmate's life in the first place. Your soulmate stared at that final message for what felt like forever. The words were simple, but their meaning carried the weight of all those lost years. If you're finally ready to know everything, they'll show it to you. There was no accusation in your message, no bitterness, no attempt to make your soulmate feel guilty. And somehow, that made the moment even more emotional. Because after everything you had apparently endured, you were still offering truth instead of revenge. Your soulmate finally typed, "I'm ready. I should have been ready a long time ago." The reply didn't come immediately. For a few minutes, your soulmate sat completely still, holding the phone with both hands. The person who had admitted judging you wrong remained nearby, but they no longer tried to influence what happened. They understood that this moment belonged to you and your soulmate. Then the phone moved. A photograph appeared. Your soulmate opened it. At first, they didn't understand what they were looking at. It appeared to be an old message, something saved from years earlier. But then they noticed the date. That date changed everything. It was from the exact week your soulmate had been told you wanted nothing more to do with them. Yet the message said the opposite. You had written that you didn't want the relationship to end because of other people's assumptions. You had asked for one honest conversation. You had even said that if your soulmate personally told you it was over, you would respect that decision and walk away. But your soulmate had never received those words. Their eyes immediately filled with tears. I never saw this. Your response came back quickly. I know. Those two words hit harder than a long explanation ever could. Your soulmate stood and began walking around the room, overwhelmed by what they were finally understanding. For years, they believed you had simply disappeared when things became difficult. They had replayed your absence again and again, trying to understand why someone who claimed to care could leave without fighting for one final conversation. Now they knew. You had tried. And somehow, that attempt had been stopped before it ever reached them. The person sitting nearby covered their mouth, realizing how deeply their own judgment had contributed to the misunderstanding. Then another image arrived. This one contained a response you had received after sending that message. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. Their face went pale. Because the response had been written as though it came from someone speaking on your soulmate's behalf. It told you there was no reason to contact them again. It suggested your soulmate had already made their decision. And worst of all, it made you believe that reaching out again would only make things harder. Your soulmate whispered, I never said this. The person beside them answered softly, then somebody else did. For several seconds, your soulmate said nothing. Then their sadness changed into determination. I want to know who. You responded with something unexpected. For years, I thought knowing the name wouldn't change anything. But now I think you deserve to know. Your soulmate waited. Then the name appeared. It was the same person they had just learned knew more than they admitted. The room went completely silent. Now there was no longer room for coincidence. No room for misunderstanding. Someone had interfered. But the biggest question remained unanswered. Why? Your soulmate immediately asked you. Why would they do this? There was a pause before your response arrived. Because they believed I would change the future they had already planned for you. Your soulmate's expression hardened. A planned future. Those words brought back memories of conversations they had almost forgotten. Expectations about who they should become. who they should build a life with. What kind of relationship would be considered acceptable? What choices would make everyone around them comfortable? And suddenly, the past looked different. This person hadn't necessarily been afraid that you would hurt your soulmate, they had been afraid your soulmate would choose you despite everyone else's plans. Your soulmate sat down slowly. So this was never only about whether you were right for me. The person who had confessed earlier shook their head. Maybe it was about control. That realization hurt. Because your soulmate remembered how often they had surrendered their own instincts to keep peace around them. Every time they questioned what they truly wanted, someone had been ready with an answer. But this time there would be no answer from anyone else. Your soulmate typed directly to you. I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. You replied. Ask. Your soulmate stared at the screen before writing the question they had been afraid to ask for years. After everything that happened, did you ever stop caring about me? The reply took longer this time. Your soulmate's heart pounded while waiting. Then your message appeared. I learned how to live with the distance. That isn't the same as forgetting what you meant to me. Your soulmate closed their eyes. That answer broke through every defense they had built. They weren't hearing a fantasy. They weren't being promised that lost years could magically disappear. They were hearing something much more powerful. The truth. Life had continued. Pain had changed both of you. Time had passed. But what happened between you had mattered. And perhaps the most painful part was realizing that both of you had carried different versions of the same unfinished story. The person beside your soulmate quietly stood. I should leave. Your soulmate looked up. For the first time that night, there was no anger in their expression. Only exhaustion and understanding. Before leaving, the person stopped at the door. If you ever gives me the chance, I want to apologize directly. Your soulmate nodded. Then came a final confession. I spent years thinking you were the problem. Tonight I realized you may have been the one person nobody allowed to tell their side. The door closed. Now your soulmate was alone. Just them. The phone. And you on the other side of years of silence. Your soulmate typed. Can I call you? This time your answer came immediately. Yes. Their finger hovered above the call button. Then they pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then the ringing stopped. You had answered. For several seconds, neither of you spoke. There was too much history inside that silence. Finally, your soulmate whispered. I don't even know where to begin. And your voice answered. Begin with what you know now. Your soulmate took a shaky breath. I know I judged your silence without knowing what happened behind it. I know I listened to people who didn't understand everything. And I know there were times I should have asked you directly instead of accepting someone else's version. There was another silence. Then your soulmate said the words that had been waiting years to be spoken. "I'm sorry I believed you stopped caring." You didn't immediately answer. When you finally did, your response surprised them. "And I'm sorry I eventually stopped trying to prove that I did." Neither person blamed the other. Neither tried to rewrite the past. For the first time, you were simply speaking honestly. But before the conversation ended, you revealed one final detail. There was another piece of the story. Something even the person who confessed earlier didn't know. Before you walked away for the final time, someone had approached you privately and made a request. A request involving your soulmate's future. And you had agreed to it because you believed it would protect the person you loved. Your soulmate immediately asked, "What did they ask you to do?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then you finally answered, "They asked me to disappear from your life without telling you the real reason." Your soulmate stopped breathing for a moment. And then came the question that would decide what happened next. Why did you agree?